Understanding photo storage. Most new users to Lightroom hear the word import and assume that when they go through that process that the photos are somehow inside of Lightroom. But that's not the case. When you import photos, you're actually only importing the references to where your photos are stored somewhere else on your hard drive. So your photos are not actually in Lightroom. Lightroom is a database that keeps track of your photos and where they're located. And the changes that you make to your photos are not actually applied to your photos. Lightroom creates what's known as Sidecar Files that contain instructions on how your edited photos should look. So outside of Lightroom, those files look exactly the same way they did in camera. They only change when you export from Lightroom and apply those changes. This is probably one of the most confusing parts of Lightroom, mainly because most of us have experienced importing and exporting capabilities of other programs, and those programs actually put our files into the program. Lightroom doesn't. So when you import your photos into Lightroom, you're actually copying your files to your computer or an external hard drive, and then letting Lightroom know where they are. I spend this much time explaining this process because I have seen new users get real confused about this process. I have seen them import thousands of photos and then, under the mistaken belief that Lightroom contains these photos, they delete the originals. The obvious problem here is Lightroom only references those originals, so the photos are gone. To further confuse this process, when you import your photos, you have the ability to create what's known as smart previews. This process lets you create previews that let you edit your photos even if the originals aren't currently available. Like you save them on an external hard drive and it's not currently connected. So if you have smart previews and you have deleted the originals, you won't find out that there's a problem until you try to print or export, because those files are actually needed to perform those processes. So the bottom line here is your photos are not stored in Lightroom, so be careful not to move or delete files outside of Lightroom. So let's take a look at this process. On screen I have the Windows Explorer on the left and I have Lightroom on the right. And basically the images that you see in Lightroom are these files right here. And when you're going to manage your photographs, you really need to do it from inside of Lightroom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create two folders inside of my portfolio, but I'm going to do that from inside of Lightroom. Now I could do it over here in Windows Explorer just by simply doing a right click and creating a new folder. The problem is that Lightroom won't recognize it, so I want this to be able to be recognized inside of Lightroom. So when I right click on my portfolio, I'm going to do the create folder inside of my portfolio. When I do that, it's going to let me name the folder, and the first one I'm going to create is called Unprocessed. And you'll notice that folder appears underneath my portfolio in Lightroom, but it also creates that folder in the Windows Explorer window. I'm going to create one more, and I'm going to right click again on my portfolio and create another folder inside of my portfolio. And I'm going to call this one Finished. So now I have two folders that are outside of Lightroom, but they're also created within Lightroom's environment, so Lightroom recognizes them. Now I want to show you one other thing. I'm going to create one more folder over here inside of Windows Explorer, and I'm just going to call this one Test. Okay, you'll notice that it created the folder over here, but Lightroom doesn't see it. So if I put anything in that folder, Lightroom's not going to be able to see it unless I do another import. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this file. So now that I have those folders created, you'll notice there's nothing in them right now. I can actually move files around inside of Lightroom, and they'll actually move in this other location as well. So for instance, if I decided I was through with this first photo, I can simply drag it into the Finished folder, and it'll tell me that it is moving the file on disk, and that I cannot undo this if I don't like it. So I want to make sure that I do want to do it, and I do. So I'm going to click Move. You'll notice that file actually disappeared from over here, but if I open the Finished file, there it is. So it's physically moving the files around on my computer, but the references inside of Lightroom are still accurate. You'll notice that it's showing that I've got one in Finished. I've got a total of 12. So any folders underneath my portfolio total up to this number right here. I'm going to take the rest of these files. So So I'm going to select the second one, hold down my Shift key and select the last one. And when I drag those into unprocessed, again it's going to tell me I'm going to move those. You'll notice they disappear from over here, and now they're in the unprocessed folder. So 11 and 1 is 12. And if I open the unprocessed folder over here, there they are. So I can move my files around inside of Lightroom however I want to, and Lightroom doesn't lose them. But again, if I move them outside of Lightroom, Lightroom is going to get confused. So for instance, if I take this second one here, that was the one that's right here, and I cut it from here, and I go paste it into the finished folder, then it has been moved, but Lightroom doesn't recognize it. And you'll notice this little warning right here that tells me that the photo is missing. So anytime you see those little exclamation points, you'll know that you have moved a file around and Lightroom doesn't know where it is anymore. So in order to fix that, what I'm going to do is, notice that if I click on that little exclamation point, it gives me the opportunity to locate it. I'm going to go ahead and click Locate, and I'm going to go back to my finished folder and say, here it is, and select it, and now that exclamation point is gone. And now I have 2 in finished and 10 in unprocessed. So that's how Lightroom recognizes things moving around. So if you're going to move files around, I would suggest you do it inside of Lightroom, because it's going to be a whole lot easier to reference those files if you don't have to go back and locate them every time you move something outside.